Hello, my true crime friends. How are you today? Hope you're having a lovely one. As you can tell, I'm really festive, and this is a funny shirt, so I hope you get a kick out of it. It says it's beginning to look like Epstein didn't kill himself. This is my husband's ugly sweater from, when Epstein killed himself. Anywho, I hope you're excited because we're at the end of our 25 days of true crime. And this case I saved for last because this is the case that really helped me get into true crime. I obviously did not, that was kind of a nervous giggle because of the severity of this case, so I do want to warn you, this case is highly graphic, mentions a lot of violence when it comes in with what happened to this person's body. If you are easily disturbed, you do not like hearing graphic things, don't watch this video or listen, because I'm going to talk about some graphic stuff. So, viewer discretion is advised for this one. So, Melissa, if you're watching this, Melissa is my sister, by the way. She knows exactly what case I'm going to be talking about and knows why I saved this for last. We are going to be talking about the Black Dahlia murder. And at first I heard of the band, the Black Dahlia Murder, which I still love them. They're a good band. They're not for everybody, so I don't recommend you listening to that type of music if you don't like alternative screamo metal. Yeah, if you don't like it, don't listen to it. So when I heard this name, I was like, that's strange. So I typed in the Black Dahlia murder, and this is when I found the images of the actual crime scene. So also, don't Google the images of the crime scene if you are easily nauseous when it comes to graphic depictions, because it's very eye-opening, because you can literally see what the coroner is talking about in her autopsy in photos. Anywho, so also, if you're new here, hey, I'm Liz. This is Creating Crime Time. I know that was a very delayed intro, but it's about to get a little weird in here. I hope you got yourself some coffee, something to drink on. I have a little snack because I'm going to eat some lunch after this. I'm also going to take this sweater off because, oh girl, it's a little toasty up in here. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this true crime case of the Black Dahlia murder. So, who is Elizabeth Short, or the Black Dahlia? So, Elizabeth Short was born on the 29th of July in 1924. She was born in Hyde Park in Massachusetts, which Hyde Park is a suburb in Boston. She's daughter number 3 of 5 to Cleo Short and Phoebe Sawyer. So her family relocated a lot in her younger life. And it's around 1927 when the family moved to Portland, but they ended up moving again later in that year to Medford, which is another suburb around Boston. This is where she was raised and spent most of her life, and her family life was not very, it was good up until the stock market crash of 1929, and her dad literally lost everything. And due to this, in 1930, they found her father's car abandoned on a bridge, which is the Charlestown Bridge, and people believed that he abandoned his car and he jumped off and committed suicide because of the financial peril that his family was going through. So what he was doing was severely affected by the stock crash because everything they had, monetary-wise, was in the stocks. So once it crashed, he lost everything. which kind of is like, if you think about it, it's kind of like the impending doom right now with everybody going into the stocks, and eventually there's going to be a crash. So, warning, if you have stocks, just don't put everything in one basket. All right. Sorry about my little side tirade. So, because of this, her mother moved Elizabeth and her sisters into a small apartment, and she was a bookkeeper that was her job, and that's how she helped support them. It is also known that Elizabeth had very bad health. She suffered from severe bronchitis, and she had asthma attacks that would flare up due to the weather that's in New England. If you have never been to New England, you will not understand our weather. It's very crazy. It's all over the place. Like, we had a few days this week. So this week in particular, our weather, it rained one day. Yesterday was 64 degrees. Today is 45, and it's drizzling again. And I think it was Sunday was like 28 degrees. Like, we're all over the place when it comes to weather. So it really affects somebody's actual health. I know for me too, it affects my health because I can't stand hot weather. I get super sick, which is like the opposite of Elizabeth. I have severe bronchitis as well. So I really understand and I empathize with her. So because of all of these problems with her lungs, she ended up having surgery at the age of 15. And after her surgery, her surgeons and her doctor recommended that they live in a milder climate so that especially during the winter, so it would prevent any flare-ups and any further respiratory problems. So her mother came up with a solution. She has family in Florida that Elizabeth can stay with during the winter and then just return back home after the thaw out in the spring, and then go back, and technically it's partly in fall, but at the tail end or mid-fall to go back down to Florida. So she would do that as a way to not flare up any other problems and to avoid any more problems for her health. So it's actually not even a year later, after all of this is worked out, Elizabeth would drop out of school. And she was just in her sophomore year of high school. Now, for Elizabeth, this would be easier for her to maintain her health because she doesn't have that focus of she needs to focus on school. That, and obviously with her being in Medford and then having to go down to Florida for a few months and then come back, obviously she's going to miss school, so there's no way she's going to be able to keep up, especially back in this time. It's not going to be good for her at all. And just a few years later, so in late 1942, her mother receives a letter from her presumed dead husband. And she is like, what? And in this letter, he explains what he did. He abandoned his car to make it look like he died so he could go and move to California to start a new life. And at this time, he was working in a naval yard in California. So for Elizabeth, she's like, oh my goodness, my dad is alive. And she ends up at the age of 18 moving to California. It relocates to stay with her dad. And this doesn't last very long because he says, yeah, you can move out and live with me as long as you cook and you clean. Well, she doesn't do that. She's a teenager. She doesn't want to cook and clean. She wants to go out and party. So that's what she does. She sleeps all day and she's out all night. And her father didn't like it. And he kicks her out. And this was in January of 1943. So she ends up, obviously after being kicked out, she finds herself a job at Camp Cook, and she is known to have lived with several different friends at the time, and also she briefly lived with an army sergeant. And this army sergeant in particular is known and thought to have abused her while living with him. So, obviously, she left her dad's in January of 1943. Now, it's like midsummer, so in the middle of 1943, she ends up leaving the base and she moves to Santa Barbara. Not even a few months go by and she has a brush with the law. So the 23rd of September of 1943, Elizabeth is arrested for underage drinking at a bar. And this results in her being sent back to Medford, Massachusetts. Well, she doesn't go back to Medford. She ends up going back to Florida, where her family is. And she just instead visits Medford occasionally. So, while she's in Florida, she ends up meeting this man, and this man's name is Major Matthew Michael Gordon Jr. Now, he is a very decorated Army Air Force officer, and he's in the 2nd Air Commando Group in the Air Force. He was training to be deployed, and Elizabeth met him, and they had this whirlwind relationship. Now, after he was deployed, they still kept in contact. Now, Elizabeth talked about him with her friends. She was so in love with him. She was so, enamored with him. She was so in love, and he's across seas doing this and that, and he's training, and all she wants to do is just be loved by him and marry him. Well, Elizabeth receives a letter from him in which he tells her that he wants to marry her. It has this very, beautiful marriage proposal, and while he was recovering. Now, he was in a plane crash, and that's why he was recovering, and he sent this letter to Elizabeth stating that he wanted to marry her, but unfortunately, he would end up dying. So, Elizabeth accepts his offer of, her hand in marriage, but they never get there because on the 10th of August, 1945, he died in a plane crash. And obviously, after he dies, she is, sent into a downward spiral. A very, super downward spiral. She's depressed. She doesn't have the man she loves anymore. She wants to go and make a new life for herself and try to turn over a new leaf. So, she goes to LA. She relocates to LA in July of 1946. And she goes there to visit a friend, somebody else that she met in Florida. His name is Joseph Gordon Fickling. And this would be the last 6 months of her life. She spent most of it in Southern California, but mostly in Los Angeles. And shortly before her death, she was known to have been a waitress, and she rented a room behind the Florentine Gardens nightclub. And this nightclub was on Hollywood Boulevard, which is a very well-known boulevard. People often described her as an aspiring actress or a film star, even though she wasn't known to have any credited acting roles or any acting jobs at the time. So let's just dive right into her actual, murder and the last time she was seen alive. So, again, if you don't want to hear anything about any severe, mutilation, or if you get very sick at mentionings, or any mention of anything that could happen to a person's actual body, click out of this video, because it's going to get very descriptive with what this person did to her. So on the 9th of January of 1947, Elizabeth had returned from a trip that she had where she went to San Diego with a married man named Robert Red Manley. Now, he was 25 and he was a salesman, and she was dating him at the time. So he told police when they interviewed him after her murder and discovery that he dropped her off at the Biltmore Hotel at 506 South Grand Avenue in downtown LA. and he dropped her off there because she said her sister was coming in from Massachusetts and she was coming to visit her. So he dropped her off at the hotel, and that's where she was going to be meeting her. Some of the staff at the Biltmore said that they saw her on the payphone, well, or on the lobby phone, but she was also seen at the Grill Cocktail Lounge, which was just 600 meters away from the Biltmore, and these two sightings were the last time she was seen alive. So on the morning of the 15th of January, 1947, Betty Bersinger was taking a walk with her 3-year-old child to the shoe store when she's walking down South Norton Street, or South Norton Ave, sorry, and she sees what she thinks to be a mannequin in a vacant lot. Well, upon further looking, she discovers that it's not a mannequin, it's a severed body. So she's quick to realize that it's a corpse, and she runs to a nearby house and calls the police. Police arrive, and it's starting to go around town that there is a body that's found. Well, they're quick to determine who she is. They find out that this body is Elizabeth Short, and it's because she already has her fingerprints on file. So what they did is they sent her fingerprints via fax to where they kept a log of fingerprints, and that's how they were able to determine who she was and who this corpse was. So upon arrival, police noticed certain things about her body, and that she was severely mutilated. She was cut in half. The body was like separated. She was super pale in color. There was no blood. And they were like, she had severe disfigurement to her face and obviously to sensitive areas of her body, we'll say that. I do have parts of, like, I did read part of what the actual coroner marked about her and of the different things that happened to her. So cops were quick to notice that obviously her body is positioned in a strange way. Her arms were positioned in right angles and her hands were up, kind of like this. And her top half was about a foot away from her upper half. They were like, so here's her top half and her bottom half was like down here. And they also saw that her intestines were like tucked underneath her butt cheeks. And her legs were spread apart. Her bottom half was a foot away from her top half, and that her arms were out like this. And it was strange how her body was posed. Like, they were very confused by how her body was posed. There was also one detail of this case that was never released, which they ended up releasing years later, that whoever did this cut off some of her hair and shoved it in her vaginal cavity. This was one of the things they found, especially during the autopsy, which we'll go over that. There were marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck, which indicated that there was a rope or rope marks. Investigators believed that she was tied down and tortured for several days before she died. And they noticed that there was certain markings on her body that was very strange. And just that the case itself was super strange and super weird. It really was bizarre for people. So I want you guys to know that this case wasn't known as the Black Dahlia case until the media dubbed it the Black Dahlia case. The cops first called it, this case was first known as the werewolf murder because of how she was mutilated. But because of how Elizabeth dressed in real life, this is why the media dubbed it the Black Dahlia case. So she was known to have her hair curled a certain way and pinned up a certain way with a flower in it. She wore black fitting, skin-tight clothing. So they dubbed it the Black Dahlia murder. And she was also she told people that she was the reason why the movie The Blue Dahlia was a thing, which literally came out a year prior to her death. So another reason why the Black Dahlia. Also, another thing that went around is that the news also portrayed Elizabeth as a sex fiend, an escort, and a lesbian who just seduced men for their money and to get whatever she wanted, and kind of dumping them before they could get what they wanted from her, which would be probably sex, and leaving them high and dry with nothing. And it's very when I read that about this case, especially after I first found out about it, I was super why would they do this to a woman that we just found cut in half and drained of blood? But it's because people they judge things before they actually get to know the actual person, before they understand why they do things they do. So let's talk about her autopsy. So again, if you are weak of the stomach, don't listen to this, because you're gonna, it's very graphic. So her autopsy was performed on the 16th of January in 1947 by Frederick Newbar. He was the LA coroner. So he noted that she was 5'5" in height, she was 115 pounds, she had blue eyes and had brown hair, and she had severely decayed teeth. He also noticed that there was ligature marks on her neck and her wrists and her ankles, which were also noted by the investigators that first arrived on the scene. He noted that there was an irregular laceration and superficial tissue loss on her right breast. So there was skin missing, and on her right forearm and her left upper arm, and also the lower side of her left chest. There was also superficial lacerations, so little cut marks and stuff that were found. These lacerations were tic-tac-toe marks in a crisscross pattern. This pattern was also found on her pubic area, where also the pubic hair had been taken off by hand and removed by hand. I don't really understand that, but I guess it would go along with if she was bound for a few days and tortured, then I kind of get it. Which then obviously the hair being inserted into her vaginal cavity makes more sense because of the hair being removed. Sorry, this is very grotesque. If any of her remaining family members is watching this, I mean no disrespect. It's just to inform people about what happened to her. And all of this is also public knowledge. People have actually released, I mean, it's kind of like a copy, but it's inverted. The colors are inverted. You can actually see her death certificate in her autopsy photos. So the way she was cut in half was a very specific way of being bisected. It's called a hemicorporectomy, which is where they literally cut straight through the spine in a way that doesn't nick any other bone. It literally goes straight through in between the vertebra, cutting the person straight in half. And this was specifically taught in the 1930s. Only 2 physicians and doctors, like different physicians, different surgeons, and different doctors. Keep that thought in your head because you're going to need it. Also, Elizabeth was thought to be anally raped due to the cavity being dilated. So they did test for semen/sperm, but there was nothing present, so there was no DNA on her body. Her body was expertly cleaned with gasoline so that there was no traces of anything else. And like I said, there was no blood left in her body. She also is known to have quite a large gash on her face, which is called a Glasgow smile. It's basically where the corners of your mouth up to your ears is cut, and from here up to your ears. That is called a Glasgow smile, and they did this to her face. The coroner did conclude that most of the mutilation to her body was done post-mortem, and that included the actual bisecting of the body, the hemicorporectomy. They know that that happened after she died. So this case quickly became media news sensation. Everybody wanted to know who killed the Black Dahlia. Everybody wanted to know. And they didn't really have anything to go on other than she was found in a vacant lot, she was cut a certain way, and she had all this disfiguring happen. And obviously in that time, there's no way to not contaminate a crime scene, so there was a lot of people there, and a lot of people took pictures of her. So the crime scene became contaminated. Even with her being expertly cleaned with gasoline, anything that was there on the crime scene was contaminated by other people being there. So there was a bigger break in the case. Mysterious letters in a package was delivered to the LAPD, and on the package it had letters cut out from newspapers, and it said, "Here are the Dahlia's belongings, letters to follow." So this box contained personal items, and such as Elizabeth's address book and just other things that were hers that nobody else would have unless it was the person that killed her. So in her address book, there was actually pages missing, which investigators believe these pages held information in regards to her, the person that killed her, or possible killers, because they still didn't know whether it was just one or whether it was 2. So like I said, she was last with Red, which was the man she was seeing. They thought he was a suspect, but eventually he was let go after he passed a polygraph, and he was just cleared all in general. So there's 2 people that are prime suspects. One in particular, but there's 2. So there is a famous doctor. The 2 suspects in this case. There's a famous doctor, and then there's a bellhop. So we have Dr. George Hodel, which a lot of people know who he is. In the 1940s, he was a physician that ran a venereal disease clinic, and he was one of 6 suspects in this case. And police would eventually bug his home, but I'll get into that. But he wasn't the only, like, favorite suspect they had. The other one was a man named Leslie Dillon, and he was a bellhop, the bellhop I referred to. He appeared in the FBI case files, which it's gained more attention since 2017, especially him because of a book called Black Dahlia, Red Rose. And this book talks about how Leslie is guilty in the case. And so Leslie was a bellhop, but he was also a writer, and he was also a mortician's assistant. So morticians at the time learned the same way that physicians, doctors, and surgeons did. They learned by operating on bodies. This thought, too, will come into play where they think it's related to another string of cases. But I'll get to that after everything. And also, Leslie knew a lot of the details that weren't released about Elizabeth's death, and this is what really brought him up, and they brought him in for questioning, but they let him go. But he still wasn't off their list. So, back to George. Lovely George Hodel. Oh, this man makes my skin crawl. So he, oh Lord, he became a prime suspect due to, obviously, his medical background. He's a doctor. He's a physician. He's treating people for venereal diseases, so he has to know what he's doing. And he also was known to have received the training in the actual bisection that happened to Elizabeth. He learned about the hemicorporectomy in the 1930s when he was in school to become a physician. Also, he became a prime suspect after his sexual abuse trial in 1949. This was because they wanted to add in sex criminals or like known suspected sex criminals. So George was in a sex abuse trial that involved his child. So it's believed that he was in a incestuous sexual relationship with his child, like a forced one, which caused her to get pregnant. And then he tried to do an abortion on her, but it didn't work. So his granddaughter is actually his daughter. There's also a podcast about him where it includes his whole family, like his daughter, his granddaughter, and then all of the children that have like her children. And I highly recommend it if you guys want to listen to a podcast. It's called Root of Evil, and it's, oh my goodness, I could not stop listening to it. Like, when that first came out, I was listening to it while I was cleaning, and I literally couldn't stop listening to it. Like, when I went to work, I was so, like, in it. And he's a very messed up man. But anywho, so it also, after he became a suspect, that's when police found out that George dated Elizabeth in 1946, very briefly, after she came back to California. So, hello, they know each other. And I mean, she could have met Leslie because he was a bellhop, and because he was a writer, but also the nightlife back then, people met a lot of people. So, I mean, it's possible that it could have been Leslie, but so more details about George came to light in 2003, and that was after his file was found. And his file is literally called the George Hodel file. And this was in the archives of the LA District Attorney's Office. And the file revealed that in 1950, he was the legit prime suspect for this case. They were going to arrest him for Elizabeth Short's murder. And it also let people know that they bugged his house between the 15th of February and the 27th of March in 1950. And they had the transcripts in the file. Now, one of these transcripts said that he paid off a lot of law enforcement, a lot of like politicians, talking about illegal abortions and his possible involvement in his secretary's death, which his secretary had overdosed. Now, secretaries know a lot more than what they let on. Some of them just play that, oh my god, I'm your secretary, here I am. Well, a lot of them know a lot more of like the dark side of their boss, which I believe that's what happened with his secretary. She knew too much, so he needed to kill her. He's a physician, he can make it look like it's like an OD. That's my personal opinion. So in this transcript, when he talks about his secretary's death, and I'll read it word for word, supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia, they can't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she is dead. They thought there was something fishy. Anyway, now they might have figured it out, killed her. Maybe I did kill my secretary. Did he just admit his guilt? Or did he talk about him killing Elizabeth? So in 1949, he was interviewed for another murder. He was interviewed for the murder of Louise Springer, or as it was called, the Green Twig murder, and this happened in June of 1949. But this fact wasn't made public until July 2018. Nobody knew he was interviewed in that case either. And in April of 1950, they had gathered enough evidence to bring charges against him. But unfortunately, they couldn't charge him with anything because he fled the country. And he went to the Philippines with no extradition. He then remarried, and a lot of people believe that he's connected to murders in the Philippines and all over the world. But he would never be arrested in for Elizabeth's murder. To this day, it's one of the most popular and most famous unsolved cases. And oh my goodness, I wish, like if they had means to arrest him, somebody tipped him off, which, I mean, that goes hand in hand with the payoffs that he had. It's annoying. So, remember how I told you that they believe that somebody with a medical background did this because the hemicorporectomy? Well, they believe that Elizabeth's death is related to the Cleveland torso murders and possibly the lipstick killer, which, I mean, it all kind of falls in line with the Cleveland torso murders because those stopped in the 30s and then she died in the 40s. So, and they received a letter, I believe it was a letter saying that the torso murderer went west and went to California. Where did Elizabeth die? In California. So, I wanted to save this case because I find it so fascinating, and not even just with her death, it's the way they disfigured her. It's so demoralizing, and the way they mutilated her body. Like, she was just this young woman trying to find her way in life, and she got caught up with the wrong people, and she got killed. And it's so sad and so tragic. And when you see pictures of her, you just see, oh my goodness, it's this beautiful woman that was so sad and so depressed because, I mean, she thought she lost her dad. She lost her fiance when he died in a plane crash. She is stuck with these medical issues that she doesn't know how to handle. Neither does her mom. She's being abused by somebody that she was living with. She gets kicked out, stuff like that. And just to end up being possibly tortured for days, drained of your blood, like having your face sliced open, it's so sad. Like, I feel really, really bad for her. Really bad. You don't expect something that gruesome in your lifetime. And obviously, I was My grandmother was born in 1941. My grandfather was born in 1932. And I mean, I asked her when she was still alive. She passed away. If she knew about this case, and she did. She remembered seeing things about it. Obviously I can't ask my grandfather because he's been dead for years. But it's like, oh my goodness, you feel so bad for her because she went through so much when she died. Like, I will say too, I did get her cause of death, which is what the coroner put down. Hold on, because it's a legit, like, long cause of death. And so the medical examiner, he determined that she died earlier on the evening of the 14th or in early hours of the 15th. So she could have been killed, like, literally, they said it was 10 hours before finding her because of lividity and liver temp. And that's how he determined when she died. Here a second. I have it. Hold on. Oh yeah, so her official cause of death is hemorrhagic shock due to a concussion of the brain and a laceration of the face. So they believe that she suffered trauma to her head that caused her to be, like, concussed, and that's when they gave her a Glasgow smile, and she died due to that. So to this day, it's still unsolved. There's the prime suspect. So it's still listed as an unsolved homicide, but to other people's opinions, it's pretty much they know who did it. But I hope you guys enjoyed today's lovely true crime case, and this rings out the 25 days of true crime. So I hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in my next video. Bye, guys.